Hello everyone, this is FaZe and welcome to my channel. I've been using Apple's new iPhone 14 Pro Max for almost a week now, and if you want to watch a full review for that I've done, you can click the link above or in the description below. So now that I've been using this new iPhone for a while, a lot of people have been asking me for my thoughts on Dynamic Island after using it for a week. Well, whether you love it or hate it, Apple's Dynamic Island is the most talked about feature on the new iPhone. I have to give credit to Apple for embracing a cutout and turning it into something pretty cool that you can actually use. It's a very Apple way of dealing with a problem that most Android phone makers have been ignoring and even hiding for years. Though I absolutely hate the name Dynamic Island, I must say it's a wonderfully executed fusion of both hardware and software. But I do have some issues with it. One of the main issues I have with Apple's new Dynamic Island is that it takes up more vertical space. It's obvious just by looking at it, but here's a visual representation courtesy of Ian Zelbo. The fact that it cuts more into the display means it's inherently more distracting than a notch. Sure, the iPhone 14 Pro's display is a tiny bit taller when you compare it to the 13 Pro's display, and that is mainly to compensate for the Dynamic Island, but even when you line up the devices from the bottom to adjust the height, you'll notice that it still cuts in. It's not just about the Dynamic Island cutting in my content, for example. The notch, in my opinion, is easier to ignore while watching widescreen videos, for instance. The fact that it's an area that floats over the content instead of sticking to the very edge makes it that much harder to ignore. Perhaps I'm just used to seeing notches so much that my brain refuses to look at the space between the cutout and the edge of the display. In my opinion, it's just a waste of space that you can't use for anything, at least right now. You see, I love the idea of having an interactive user interface, but I also find a busy and persistent cutout like this on top of apps very distracting. I would much rather appreciate it if there was an option to disable it on certain apps. I would disable it in a heartbeat while using, let's say, Safari for reading articles or other important web pages and not have a live activity always distracting me. Next, you get fingerprints all over the camera. Not only is Dynamic Island more intrusive than the traditional notch, but it's also constantly drawing your attention. It looks alive with fancy animations, but the only way you can interact with the Dynamic Island is with touch inputs. You'll find yourself poking this cutout a lot throughout the day, meaning you're also touching the selfie camera or the area surrounding it. Now, you might say, just avoid touching where the camera is. That's easy to say, but accidental touches will and do happen. Maybe eventually we'll all develop the willingness to interact with Dynamic Island without always smudging up the camera lens one day, but at least right now it's something that's hard to get used to. Last but certainly not the least, reachability is an issue. Apple's iPhones are big, especially when you compare them to the sizes just a few years back. And Apple's Dynamic Island is located towards the top edge of the display. It's arguably one of the most difficult parts of the phone to reach with just one hand. It may not be an issue on the smaller iPhone 14 Pro or for those with bigger hands, but with the iPhone 14 Pro Max, this is quite a task. And I know I speak on behalf of a large subset of users when I say that the Dynamic Island is hard to reach and even harder on the larger iPhone 14 Pro Max. Now, it's not like people with smaller hands can entirely ignore the cutout and continue using the phone without it. That's because it's constantly staring at you, bouncing and animating around and seeking attention. I also expect to be fully forced to pay more attention to the Dynamic Island as more developers will start building some cool features for it. This will most certainly happen because the Dynamic Island is here to stay, and it's also going to evolve over time. It's also reportedly making its way to the affordable iPhones next year, so get ready to stretch your fingers, especially on the Plus and the Pro Max models. Now, at the end of the day, Dynamic Island is really cool and definitely comes handy. But I also wanted to give you all the drawbacks of the Dynamic Island as well, since almost every review I'm seeing is just talking about how cool it is. But don't let any of that take away from the fact that the new iPhone Pro models are great phones. In fact, I think they're some of the best iPhones Apple has ever made. And like I said in the beginning of the video, be sure to check my full review of the new iPhone 14 Pro out. Like always, I want to know your thoughts on the Dynamic Island. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Do you think it's a gimmick provided by some clever marketing? Whatever it is, comment below and let me know. Till then, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.